Okay.
Welcome, everyone. SABR member Jack Bales is here to talk about his book, one of his books on the shelf, The Chicago
Yeah,
Cub
right.
Shot for Love, a
Yeah.
showgirl's crime of passion in the 1932 World Series. I'll turn it over to Jack. Ask everyone to mute yourself if you could, so we won't have any interruptions during the presentation. And Jack, it's all yours. Glad you're
Okay.
here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much for having me here. I just love talking about this. Really, just a fascinating baseball story about the 1932 Cubs, but also, as I say, it's a terrific tale of a true crime intrigue, and topped off with dozens of photographs. Some of them have never before been published. And by the way, the town of Brookfield, Illinois, has picked this book as a community read for August. So I look forward to having a whole community read it and talking about it as well. So anyway. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim, let me share my screen here. Guys, thought of that. Let me share my screen, and there we go. And let me get over just a second right here, and let me get on to the slideshow. There we go. There we go. Now we're all set. Okay, forgot to do that. And so let me start out with September 20th, 1932, and the Cubs had just clinched the National League pennant with a record of 90 wins and 64 losses, and they were 4 games in front of the second place Pittsburgh Pirates. And the Chicago Daily Tribune was rather stunned by this accomplishment, as you can see by the headline here, the hard luck to win, and they defying the experts who did not pick them to win. Early on, it was thought that they would need some help in the pitching department, but Lon Warneke, who had been a rookie in 1931, he won 22 games and lost just 6 that year. He had a 2.37 ERA, and the mighty slugger Hack Wilson had been traded during the offseason, but Johnny Moore stepped up, and he had 3.05 that year. And the Tribune reported, quote, that never before was a team beset with more irritating experiences apart from the playing of baseball. For example, there was an obvious bad blood between the club president, William Beck, father of the well-known showman Bill Beck. Beck is in Beck, as he says in his autobiography, and also between him and the team's talented but thoroughly disagreeable manager, probably the greatest right-handed hitter of all time, Rogers Hornsby. Now, the Sporting News here points out, as you can see, the season gave the Cubs, quote, a succession of buried thrills, and tops on both the lists of the Tribune and the Sporting News was this July 6th shooting of their star shortstop, as you can see here, in an episode of Unrequited Love, and there is hope that he will recover. And of course, he did recover. Now, the sensational shooting of a popular baseball player by his former lover, Violet Popovich, immediately captured the public's attention and news headlines, as you can see here. And everybody wanted to know exactly what had happened in room 509 of Billy's hotel room in Chicago's Hotel Carlos. And just a few hours after reporters first heard the news, the city's afternoon newspapers were on the stands in banner headlines, as you can see here. The Associated Press carried the news across the country, probably across more than just the country, in fact, reporting that, quote, a woman scorned almost took the life of Bill Jurgis, star shortstop of the Chicago National Baseball Club. Now, here's how it all started, my work on it, as a matter of fact. While working on this previous Cubs book, I read about the shooting in a couple of Cubs histories, some of the ones on my bookshelf right in back of me, in fact. But the authors provided little information besides a few cursory comments. So I kind of filed this away in my head. Yeah, I got to get back to this after I get done with this book. But since I felt that the story made the Cubs season really intriguing, I set out to find additional details about the dramatic confrontation in Jurgis's hotel room. Now, information about Billy's life seemed readily available, but what about Vada's background? What about her childhood, and what about her family? You know, what did she do with her life after the excitement died down and people turned to other stories? And of course, what happened to the Cubs and the rest of their 1932 season? The season made really particularly dramatic because of Babe Ruth's called shot at the end in the World Series. Whoops, my notes here. Now, newspaper articles provided both day-by-day coverage interviews with Billy, with Violet, and also others, comments with the ball players who rescued Billy in his hotel room, came to Billy's aid in his hotel room. All these people, there are comments on all these newspaper articles. Chicago's court records were invaluable. In fact, I employed a researcher in Chicago to help me get some of these court records because they're extremely difficult to find, but she was very, very familiar with how the court system worked. And so she was just invaluable at finding some of these records that you can see over here. Why these were important, there was a long drawn out divorce between Violet's father and her mother. In fact, Violet even had to testify at the divorce hearing. I was also able to interview. I interviewed Violet's two nephews. I interviewed Billy Jurgis's daughter before she died, and also extensively interviewed Billy's grandson, William Price, and he really filled in some gaps too, as did all these people I interviewed. But today, what I want to talk about today, for the next 40 minutes or so, or excuse me, next 35, maybe 35 minutes or so, I want to talk about the shooting of Billy by his former girlfriend, their court hearing, and their arraignment in Chicago, and a few more details about Violet's life. I'm going to talk about the 1932 Cubs and also profile Billy's life and show quite a few photographs, including some from my book, some not from my book, and most of these have never before been published. Okay. Now in July, we're talking July 1, 1932. The Cubs were in first place in the National League, and they were in the middle of a tight pennant race. And a player who was contributing to the Cubs' success was 24-year-old shortstop Billy Jurgis. He was going great. He was doing really well. You know, Rogers Hornsby called him one of the best shortstops in the National League. Well, 21-year-old Violet Popovich would soon put a stop to that. Just a few days later, in fact. Now, Billy and a few of the other Cubs were staying at the Hotel Carlos, which was just a couple of blocks north of Wrigley Field on Sheffield Avenue. And on the morning of July 6th, Billy was getting ready for a game with the Philadelphia Phillies, and the Cubs were now in third place in the National League. In their division, in the National League, 3 games behind the Pirates. And about 9:45, Violet Popovich called him from her room 111, and said she wanted to see him. And he told her to come upstairs, and about 10:15, she knocked on his door, room 509. And this Billy's room is right here, the top floor all the way to the right. That's Billy's room right over there, in front of Sheffield Avenue. And they had been going out for about a year, but he had recently called things off, and they had a big argument. In fact, what he said later on in an interview about, maybe 50, almost, gosh, but 40, 50 years later, he said that he really wanted to concentrate on baseball. He had been going out, and but he told her, look, we have a chance to win the pennant. I want to concentrate on baseball. Also, I got the impression, he didn't really say this, I kind of read between the lines in an interview that he gave, is that he was young, he was single, he was just a good looking guy, and he kind of wanted to see other people. And he said, in fact, he even said, I was single and I wanted to have a good time. Anyways, she wanted to talk about their relationship. The conversation grew more heated, and she asked him for a glass of water, and he left the room to get it, which was a bad move on his part, as you can see here. I had an artist draw this for me from a book, as a matter of fact. While he was getting it, she pulled out a small caliber revolver, and as the New York Times wrote, quote, he made a wild lunge for the gun, and just like they say in the movies, 3 shots rang out. One bullet struck him in the right side, it ricocheted off a rib and came out his right shoulder. Another one grazed the little finger of his left hand. A third one hit Violet in her wrist and traveled up her arm about 6 inches. Bouncing off the rib this way undoubtedly saved his life, the doctor said, because otherwise it would certainly have hit a vital organ and he would have died. As it was, he said, quote, I bled like a pig, unquote, and he thought he was going to die. As luck would have it, Billy's Billy's teammates happened to be on the same floor. They heard the commotion. They came in and, came into the rescue, got the Cubs doctor who was down on the first floor. He happened to be in the room or happened to be in the hotel. And both of them were treated and taken off to a local hospital. By the way, these are all wire photos, original wire photos from my collection. The Chicago newspapers, of course, pounced on this, and as they say nowadays, it went viral. It was also somewhat sensational. Violet I kept track of all the names she was called, the adjectives and everything else. She was, let's see, the dark-haired former chorus girl, the pretty gun toter, the 21-year-old comely brunette, and the raven-tressed beauty. She stayed in the Illinois Masonic Hospital for a couple of days, and here she is leaving for the Bridewell Hospital. And why she was taken there is because it was right next to the Cook County Jail. Note her bandaged left arm there, and she was booked on a charge of assault with intent to kill. In the meantime, the police searched her hotel room and they found these two photographs right here. They also found a note addressed to her brother in which she said, quote, to me, life without Billy isn't worth living, but why should I leave this earth alone? I'm going to take Billy with me. Well, that kind of unquote, that kind of sounds ominous right there, doesn't it? But later, though, she just kind of, backed off and said that the note was the result of too much gin and that she only wanted to kill herself to make Billy sorry for breaking up with her. And she said that in an interview that when Billy was out of the room getting her a glass of water, quote, I pulled out my revolver intending to kill myself. Bill saw me and grabbed the gun. We fought for it. We really fought for it. The gun kept exploding. I didn't want to hurt him. Unquote. Now, Violet made the newspapers almost daily, particularly on July 15th, the day of her arraignment. By the way, this is my favorite photograph in the entire book. A newspaper reporter found it in his files and gave it to me. He gave me the original negative, the original 4x4 negative, I guess it is, in those yellow paper sleeves, the original negative. And this is the only contemporary photograph of Violet that has the whole body pictured like this. And I love it. I just love it. It just captures her essence at that time. The Chicago American said that when she entered the courtroom with her attorneys, quote, the crowd gasped at her radiant beauty. The Daily Illustrated Times wrote that she was, quote, a symphony in red and white with her red earrings, her red shoes, and her red striped trimmings and her white crepe sports dress exactly matching her shade of lipstick, unquote. I found out later, this is not in my book, but these are really two high-priced attorneys. A guy in Chicago, a SABR member of Chicago told me this. And we started, and he wanted to know, how could Violet pay her legal fees? And another SABR member pointed out that his father used to be a Chicago reporter, and he covered all sorts of famous Chicago cases, not this one, but he said back in the day, a lot of newspapers would pay legal costs for people if they would agree to be interviewed by their reporters. And of course, I had lots and lots of interviews with, I read lots and lots of interviews with Violet, so I don't know which paper did that, if any of them did, but it kind of makes sense that maybe a paper paid her legal costs to get her to her side of the story and everything. By the way, I went through every single Chicago newspaper on microfilm page by page, because most of these weren't available online. Chicago Evening Post, Chicago Daily News, Chicago Evening, the Daily Illustrated Times, Chicago American. There were at least 8 or 9. I think I have them listed in my book in the bibliography that I went through all of them, just page by page by page. The Tribune was online, but that was about the only one. Anyway, the judge, John SABR, was not only an attorney and judge, but he was also the ultimate political fixer. He ran a mortuary favored by Chicago's mobsters who used his garage as a drop-off place for bootleg liquor. he was also a Cubs fan, and he, like Billy and like the Cubs, all wanted this to just quietly go away. In fact, he asked Billy beforehand, Billy, what do you want me to do? So, oh, let's just drop it. Billy said this in an interview many years later. Billy refused to press charges. The judge dismissed the whole case, and Bartlett told reporters, I owe it to my self-esteem to get on with my life. If I see Billy ever again, it will only be I'll only say hello and move on. I love this photograph too. I have the original wire photo of this. There's Billy, there's Violet looking at one of her two attorneys. There's Billy. No, he's not hiding his face from the camera. He is, I'm sorry, he is hiding. He's not blowing his nose. I mean, but he's hiding his face from the camera. Lots of photographers, a packed courtroom. Some of Billy's teammates are there. Violet's Showgirl's friends are there. Her mother's there. The whole place is packed and packed. Now, this was July 15th. It's about to get to the point where you can't make this stuff up, everybody. Okay. Now, on July 22nd, Billy got shot on July 6th. The arraignment was on July 15th. That's Billy there on July 15th, all better. And on July 22nd, he felt well enough to take the field in a game against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played a third base instead of shortstop because he thought it was thought to be less stretching for him to do. And the Cubs lost 3-1, but as one newspaper reported out, quote, Bill Jurgis, the celebrated revolver target, bowed himself back into his profession by socking a single to center. Now, although Billy refused to sign a complaint against Violet, she decided to capitalize on her newfound fame by signing a contract to perform as a singer using her stage name, Violet Daly, in a show called the Bear Cub Follies. And I'm not talking BEAR. Billing herself as you can see here, the girl who shot for love. You can't make this stuff up. And the State Congress Theater, you look at the sign there, it's called Chicago's Greatest Burlesque. This is in a real seedy area of Chicago on State Street, South State Street, known for its rundown rooming houses and hotels, its dingy saloons, its pool halls, and the burlesque theaters. And interestingly enough, on the same day, newspapers reported Billy's return to the baseball field. Violet returned to the stage as a singer, and in this burlesque show, and management did its part to attract an audience by booking these Bear Cub girls as her opening act. And this is I found this ad, again, I went through this newspaper page by page on microfilm, and lo and behold, that just, caught me by surprise right there. And this is in my book. I love that ad. And I had a person who really knew what she was doing make a really nice image of that for me from the microfilm. It was just great. I was fortunate enough to find a detailed review also in another newspaper, the Chicago Daily News, which also discussed exactly what went on in a burlesque show. And the degree of nudity I found out depending on the applause each Bear Cub girl got. The greater the applause, the more clothes she took off. In fact, I liked the review so much, I reprinted it in my book. Now, Violet's nephew told me that her singing career didn't exactly take off, and that her lack of success may have stemmed from her lack of talent. As her, in fact, she was supposed to go for, I think, 6 weeks. It closed after about only 2 or 3 weeks. As a nephew told me, quote, she liked to sing. That is, she tried to sing. And Violet had all these other problems too. She was soon back in the news, and Judge John Sabarbaro's courtroom again, because her bail bondsman was a part-time real estate agent and a full-time hustler and full-time con man. He stole her Billy love letters. He wanted to sell them. He wanted to make copies of them and sell them in booklet form in ballparks around the country under the title Love Letters of a Shortstop. And he just told Violet this, but what he really wanted to do, he stole the letters because he wanted to blackmail Billy into giving him $25,000. Otherwise, he threatened to publish them. But, both schemes failed. Violet finally got her letters back. But then she was soon back on the stage just in the late 1930s, singing sentimental love songs at this Kitty Davis cocktail bar. And she's also seeing this man here named Fred Williams, who worked in the office of his father's hardware factory. And they applied for a marriage license. They never married, though. And by 1940, Violet and her mother were living in Los Angeles, moved from Chicago, living in Los Angeles. A few years ago, Violet's nephew, a man named Mark Prescott, the son of her brother Mark, learned of my research and contacted me, and he offered me all these family photographs and his insights. He knew Violet real well, and he introduced me to his cousin who lived with Violet for a while. So I had all this great resource of material to work with. And along with other research, lots of more information about Violet and her early years came about. And I did more research, did some research in lots of other places, Chicago records, the orphanage where Violet stayed, let me go through their records too. So I learned a great deal about what went on. I love this picture, by the way. It's really my favorite picture of her. She looks so sweet and innocent. You know, who would have thunk it, as they say, that a couple years later she'd be pulling a gun out of her purse. But you know, she looks like a nice person. Anyway, Violet's father was a man named Mirko, changed his name to Mike. He was Popovich, who was an Austrian immigrant who arrived at Ellis Island in 1907. He was an electrician by trade. He settled in Chicago. And in 1910, he married Margaret Heindel, also from Austria. They had 4 children, of which Violet was the oldest. The marriage was not a happy one. When Violet was only 10 days old, Mike began beating his wife, giving her black and blue eyes. The couple got divorced in 1920 on the grounds of extreme and repeated cruelty. In fact, 8-year-old Violet had to testify at the divorce hearing. Child support was slow in coming, even though Mike had a very good job as an electrician. And for a few years, Margaret was forced to have her children stay at the Ulick Children's Home in Chicago, still standing. I went through all their records, run by the Lutheran Church. Violet said in interviews that she was married at a young age, but it was a very short marriage. I was unhappily married at age 18, she said, one of those puppy love affairs with a schoolboy. I never lived with him, and we were divorced 6 months later. By the way, let me go back here. Let me just interject something. It was, I think it was Michael at the top here. Mirko wanted to come and take Michael back to home to live with him, and I found a letter in the orphanage's records saying that from the director of the orphanage, saying that that Mr. Popovich wanted to take Mike to go go back with him, and he refused, and he told the administrator that the orphanage was the only real home I'd ever known. You know what an upbringing he must have had. He'd rather stay here than live with his father. But anyway, right after Violet's divorce, she got married at age 18, and soon after that, she got divorced, and she applied. She enrolled in a dancing school there in Chicago. And in the early 1930s, she joined the chorus of a Chicago production of Vanities. It was an annual musical produced by the New Yorker Earl Carroll, who at that time was famous for his elaborate shows and scantily clad showgirls. In fact, the souvenir pamphlet here notes the show down at the bottom there, the bottom right-hand corner. It calls it America's Greatest Review. And right above that, it says, "Through these portals pass the most beautiful girls in the world," which was his motto for his show. Again, in the summer of 1931, Violet met Billy at a party. She met him at a party. And as she said in the interview, quote, "Bill is a boy and 100,000 for me. I met him at a party, and if it wasn't love at first sight, it was certainly second." And of course, then a year or two later, they had their dramatic meeting at the Hotel Carlos. They met in 31. Violet got serious right away. They had their fight in the spring of 1932. They had their confrontation in the Hotel Carlos on July 6, 1932. And later, she sang at the burlesque show, sang in nightclubs, and eventually moved to Los Angeles in 1939, 1940. We'll continue with volleyball, but let's get back to Billy and the Cubs for a while. And they're the team's infielder, Woody English, who would play a third baseman and shortstop. Hall of Famer Billy Herman, the second baseman, is next. Charlie Grimm, team captain and first baseman, and Stan Hack, call him Smiling Stan Hack, is second to the end there, and Billy is at the far right. Billy rejoined the team on July 22nd, as I said, and after their loss to Pittsburgh that day, they found themselves 3.5 games behind the league-leading Pittsburgh Pirates, and everyone was under a lot of stress because Billy had been shot. Nobody and the team members did not particularly care for Rogers Hornsby, and there are all these whispered comments within the Cubs organization that centered on the obvious animosity between William Veeck and Rogers Hornsby. And Beck believed that the team was easily good enough to win the National League pennant, and he's getting really sick and tired of Rogers Hornsby's comments about how awful the team was and how they weren't practicing well, they weren't playing up to their potential. We need better players, blah, 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 blah. And the players, as I said, too, had little use for Hornsby. And as Billy Herman said, quote, he was one of the greatest hitters that ever lived, maybe the greatest, but he never talked hitting with us. He just expected us to go up there and do it. Things continued to get worse. A loss to the Brooklyn Dodgers on August 2nd put the Cubs 5 games behind the Pirates. And that evening, Beck fired Hornsby, said, "You're out of here," and appointed as manager the popular first baseman and team captain, Charlie Grimm. He called himself the left-handed banjo player, as you can see here. Grimm lived up to his nickname, Jolly Charlie, they called him, and the team flourished under his easygoing, even-tempered leadership style. Now, club president William Veeck was concerned about Billy's recovery right after the shooting. And moreover, there was a loss of player manager Rogers Hornsby. So Veeck brought in infielder Mark Koenig to help out his shortstop. And he used to play with the Yankees. And he proved to be an excellent choice as he helped the Cubs clinch the National League pennant on September 20th. He batted .353 during 33 games he played for the Cubs from August 14th to the end of the season, September 25. So and in fact, the players even said, he really helped us win the pennant. Now each team would get a share of the World Series gate receipts, and the players got to vote on how much each person got, but it had to be unanimous to get a full share. And 2 Cubs players, Billy Herman and Billy Jurgis, voted not to give Koenig a full share of the World Series gate receipts as he had played in just the last part of the season, 33 games. Instead, they gave him only a half share. I think there were 151 games, I think, in the season. I'm not sure about that, but I think it was 151, 152 maybe. He played in 33, but again, he had 353, and he really did help him win the pennant too. Now, the New York Yankees, Koenig's former team and the Cubs World Series opponents, they didn't see it that way. And now, when the newspapers announced the World Series breakdown, the Yankees and Babe Ruth particularly, they blasted the Cubs as cheapskates and penny pinchers. And as Babe Ruth said, quote, "I hope we beat them 4 straight. They gave Koenig a sour deal in his player cut. They're chiselers, and I tell them so." Okay, so as famed Washington Post sports writer Shirley Povich wrote, by the way, Shirley Povich was the father of talk show host Maury Povich, quote, "The Cubs' stinginess fired the Yankees to new heights." Now the Cubs were down 2-0 in the World Series, and Game 3 was played in Chicago. Now it's in the 5th inning with the score tied 4-4. And Ruth was at the plate facing pitcher Charlie Root, and Charlie Root was known to be a real hard-nosed pitcher. He would throw at somebody with the drop of a hat. The score is tied 4-4. Ruth was facing Charlie Root. The count was at 2 balls and 2 strikes. And then Babe Ruth raised 2 fingers of his right hand. So did he signal that that was only 2 strikes and that he had 1 left? Some people say he did that. Did he gesture rather contemptuously to the Cubs? Did he gesture to Charlie Root? Or did he point to center field as if to signal that he was going to hit a home run? Now that is, did he call his shot? But really, everybody, what person saw depended upon where they were sitting and the angle of the view. And even the Ruth biographers have pointed this out. And even the home movies taken at this time at that game were of little help, according to Robert Kramer in his Ruth biography. But in any case, Babe Ruth did indeed hit a home run, but few people even know, though, or remember that Lou Gehrig right after that got a home run himself. And the Cubs lost that game 7-5. The Yankees went on to beat the Cubs 4-0, just as Babe Ruth had hoped that they would. The Cubs did not even win 1 single game. Of course, whether or not Babe Ruth called his shot has been debated ever since October 1, 1932. And I go into this in some detail. But, everybody, I could think of 2 books. 2 books, they're both of them called The Call Shot, in fact, we go into this whole thing. 2 whole books on 1 pitch, or one play, I guess. But what I found out was and I'm no expert on the whole call shot thing, but what I did find out, and I went to all these contemporary sources and everything, but the opinion about whether he did or did not call his shot does not fall along partisan lines, because I found former Cubs, including Cub pitcher Guy Bush, and he was probably, from what I gathered by reading all these first-person accounts, he was probably Babe Ruth's main heckler, and he maintained all his life. Of course, he pointed out there. I was there. I saw him. He pointed. Pat Piper, the Cubs on-the-field announcer, he was on-the-field announcer for 40 years, and he maintained all his life. Of course, he pointed. I was there. But then I found Yankees who just as emphatically said he did not point. Frankie Guzzetti said he didn't point. I have an interview with Joe McCarthy, the Yankees manager. He said, "Oh yeah, that was a good story, but of course he didn't do that. He didn't point." I got the impression, and if you believe that he did not point, it all stemmed from this Joe Williams article over here, that he was the first person who said Ruth called shot. And Robert Kramer points out that perhaps reporters down the road saw this headline, and they had they got that idea of calling his shot, and down the road they kind of fell into the line of view and kind of echoed that same opinion that he called shot. But again, there were both Yankees and Cubs players who said he did call it, and Yankees and Cubs players who said he did not. But again, reporters did pick up on it after this article right over here. But according to the hard-nosed pitcher Charlie Root, he said later on that, quote, if Ruth had tried to show him up by signaling where he was going to hit the baseball, quote, anybody who knows me knows that Ruth would have ended up on his ass. Now, of course, as one of the authors of the most recent book on the call shot, he notes in his book, well, that would have put Ruth on base with Lou Gehrig coming up. Would he really have put Ruth on base with another home run hitter coming up? He kind of had doubts about that, and that's a good point. In any case, Charlie Root, would tolerate no kidding around about this. He was offered a large sum of money to play himself in the movie, The Babe Ruth Story, and he said he refused to. He said, not if you're going to show him pointing. And of course, that was the highlight of the whole movie. I'm not going to be in the movie, so he turned down all this money. And even Ruth's family members didn't get a free pass. One time, Charlie Root was on a family picnic with his family, including his daughter, his Charlie Jr., his son, and Charlie Jr.'s wife, and they were playing wiffle ball, and Charlie naturally was pitching. Charlie Jr.'s wife was up to bat, and she took her wiffle ball bat and pointed it out to right field, and old Charlie, he wound up and threw the wiffle ball as hard as he could, knocked her on the neck and knocked her down. Hey, you don't go pointing here when I'm pitching. And the subject rankled him his whole life. A few days right before he died, he told his daughters, his quote, "I gave my whole life to baseball, but I'll be remembered for something that never even happened." But as Robert Kramer and others point out, in fact, Charlie Grimm, who said he pointed in the Sporting News right after it, but in his autobiography, he said he didn't point. He even said, whatever happened, only Babe Ruth and his charismatic presence and his extraordinary power could have transformed just a few minutes of baseball history into American legend. And even as Charlie Grimm said, a great guy hit that ball, hit that home run, the greatest slugger of all time. And I discuss the rest of Billy's career in my book, including his rather disastrous 1959 and 1960 seasons as manager of the Boston Red Sox. All his life he wanted to be manager. It was a big dream, and he was made manager in 59. It did not go well at all. He told an interviewer later on, quote, "When you become a manager, you have to have a team that is coming up. All of my players on the Red Sox were finishing up their careers, and there was not much I could do there." In fact, he told another interview, all the players on my team were going down, and there wasn't much I could do there. He did do his best, but he was let go in June 1960 with a disappointing major league managerial record of 59 to 63, a winning percentage of just .484. But he finished his career as a very, very well-respected scout, and also as an instructor. Quite a few spring seasons he played on teams and helping their players become good players. Eddie Matthews, Hall of Famer, he publicly owed his success to Billy. Harmon Killebrew is another one. He owed his success to Billy, he said, and Billy played for quite a few teams as an instructor during spring training. Billy quit the baseball life in the early 1980s to take care of his ailing wife, Mary, who died in 1984. Several years later, Billy remarried, and as he put it, he and his wife Phyllis, quote, "enjoyed the good life in Largo, Florida." There was a park near his house. They play horseshoes, they dance, they play pinochle. He and his wife would travel together. They'd visit with ball players who lived nearby, such as first baseman Phil Cavaretta of the Cubs, and they socialized with former teammates at baseball functions. Billy was not at all a powerful hitter. In fact, he'd go to spring training early just to work on his hitting because he knew that's where the money was. But he did compensate for that with his really solid defensive skills. During his 17 years as a major league, from 1931 to 1947, he led the National League shortstops in fielding percentage 4 times in 1932, 1935, 1937, and 1939, and once in double plays turn, 1935. He batted, in fact, when he was with Boston, let me digress, when he was with Boston, his years as manager there weren't his months as manager weren't too good. And I went through the Boston Herald, the Christian Science Monitor, which was a Boston paper, and he was raked over the coals. I know Pumpsie Green integrated the Red Sox during Billy's tenure, and Billy got a lot of flack one time for really yelling at Pumpsie Green for missing out on a double play, and Bill, that was one of Billy was really good at the double players, and he told Pumpsie Green, he said, quote, "A good player makes the double plays." But he batted .258 in 1,816 games, and he collected 1,613 hits. He was with the Cubs from 1931 to 1938. Then he joined the Giants, and then New York Giants. And he was back to the Cubs to finish out his career from 1946 to 1947. One time he told an interviewer, quote, "Cubs, Giants, good year or bad year, I've never failed to do my best to play out to the limit. Baseball has done well by me. I have done all I could for baseball." Billy was diagnosed with cancer in 1991. He entered the hospital in early 1997, died a few weeks later on March 3rd at age 88. Okay, let's get back to Violet, finish out her career here. By 1940, Violet and her mother moved to Los Angeles, as I said. Now, Violet always considered herself a professional singer and had these photographs taken by a professional photographer to try to get back on the stage. And I love that one of the cape in those. I guess that's a cape, I don't know, and those short shorts there. She used these photographs to try to get back on the stage. And unfortunately, despite all these glamour shots, she saw few opportunities for launching a West Coast singing career. And some of these photographs are in my book here too. Now, Violet was a city person, and her 1947 marriage to Charlie Retzlaff, a prize fighter from Duluth, Minnesota, was probably doomed from the start. He was known as the Duluth Dynamiter and was regarded as a very, very good fighter until he met a young boxer in 1936 who knocked him out in the first round. And of course, that probably wasn't surprising since that young boxer was Joe Louis. And that year he would be crowned the world heavyweight champion. Now, the gregarious and rather attractive, just a second here, rather attractive Violet Popovich was certainly not at a loss for male friends, and she once caught the eye of motion picture star John Wayne, the John Wayne, who struck up a conversation with her at a cocktail lounge, not far from, near where she worked in Paramount Studios, the motion picture studio in the color film department. Shall we say that John Wayne did not particularly take his marriage vows too seriously, if you know what I mean. And so he, they got to talking, and he said he'd drive her home. And she told her nephew, who told me this story, that he had high hopes of getting comfortable and staying a while, but they were soon dashed by the presence of her mother, who was waiting up for Violet. So, John Wayne had to go home instead of sticking around for a little bit. She dated both Leo Durocher and Al Lopez in the 1930s, and Al Lopez again in the 1960s when he was manager of the Chicago White Sox. And of course, Leo Durocher later became manager of the Cubs. So here's a good trivia question for you. What showgirl went out with two Hall of Famers who were managers of the Cubs and the White Sox? So ask that when you have a trivia question contest sometime in baseball, see who knows the answer to that one, and Violet went out with two Hall of Famers, not at the same time, but with two Hall of Famers who were later Hall of Famers. Violet spent her final years in a nursing home. She did not have much money, but made up for it with her upbeat attitude and cheerful spirits. One of Violet's nephews lived with her for a while, and he told me that she was always upbeat. She loved movies, she loved baseball, and he told me at this time that he never knew that she had shot Billy Jorgis and everything. But she regaled nursing home people and the staff and the residents with tales of her showgirl past. She died on February 25, 2000, was buried in Los Angeles's Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills. She was 88 when she died, just like Billy. Now, I discussed in my book that, like Violet, the Hotel Carlos had its share of tough times. I figured out that I think it was, the shooting was in 1932, and the hotel was built either in 1930 or 1931. In fact, I later struck up an email correspondence with the nephew or maybe grandson of the person who built this building. He told me some things about it. But over the years, it gradually fell into disrepair. And the picture on the left, you can see the air conditioner there at the upper left, got that trim kind of falling apart. To the right of the doorway there, it looks like there's been that column has been patched up. On the right photograph there, right above the awning, you can see a sign there that says Sheffield House, Sheffield House and Hotels written in small black letters underneath it. It changed its name. The building did retain the imposing stone entryway, though, as you can see. But just a few years ago, a real estate company purchased it, and it completely remodeled it and renamed it the 3834 North Sheffield. And according to its webpage, the property was, quote, a once hip apartment hotel for Cub players. but it now offers studio apartments to upscale professionals. And the owners announced that the new hardwood floors, the granite countertops, the stainless steel appliances, quote, modernize the glorious vintage details that remain from a gorgeous and distant era. And as you can see, Billy's room is still up there, the top floor, the far right. In fact, a friend of mine took these photographs just a couple of years ago, but that's what it looks like right now. Just a couple more things before we wrap this up. Let me see how we're doing in time. In 1949, 19-year-old Chicagoan Ruth Ann Steinhagen, who had, to quote the New York Times, a twisted fascination with former Cub and then Philadelphia Philly Eddie Waitkus, shot him in his room at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. Ironically, Waitkus and Jurgis had played together for 2 years, and Billy had hit a double in Billy's, and Eddie had hit a double in Billy's last game on September 9th, 1947. The author Bernard Malam had never mentioned where he got his source material, but it seems likely that one or both of these shootings inspired him to include a passage in his 1952 novel, The Natural, in which a woman shoots ball player Roy Hobbs. Now, one last thing I want to point out, did Violet really intend to kill Billy when she burst into his room? She left a note saying that that was her intention, but remember, she later changed her mind and said she only wanted to kill herself. And as it turned out, the police were correct to doubt her, and other people doubted her too. And Mark Prescott, Violet's nephew, told me that she had confided to his mother, Violet's sister-in-law, that she had indeed gone to room 509 with a gun in her purse with the express purpose of killing Billy. And she told his mother, I was very angry at Billy and I wanted to kill him. Here's my book with a foreword by Tim Wiles, a former research director at the Hall of Fame. Note my email address there. Anybody ever buys a copy, I had book plates designed with the image of the book on the front of it. I'd be happy to send an inscribed one to anybody who buys a book. You put it in the book itself. It's all my email address is there, and just email me. I'll be glad to send you one. Now, let me end this something on a light note. I've enjoyed all this research. I'm writing a great deal. Had a great time immersing myself in newspaper articles and court records and interviewing both Billy and Violet family members. And some years ago, I decided to even make Violet part of my family Christmas card with me, my son, and my daughter. So here's my Christmas card a few years ago. And note the bandage on Violet's arm, and on it says, Violet, I hope you feel better soon. Go Cubs, Jack. And thank you very much. Let me stop my screen sharing here. Okay. Thank you. Let me get out of here. Here we go.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. What a lot of strands woven together into an interesting and fascinating story. Any questions for Jack? You can just unmute and go ahead. I think we're a small enough group. You don't have to raise your hand or anything. Go ahead.
Hey, Karen. Hey, Karen.
Yeah, I feel like a child student. I read in the book, which is wonderful. I love it.
Thank you, Karen.
It mentions baseball Annies.
Yes, baseball Annies.
Is that all the women who were groupies, or was it just her?
Oh, that expression came about because of that movie. Now, what was the movie?
Bull Durham.
Bull Durham. Yeah, it was a movie, Bull Durham, and I can't remember her name, but I met her at a Nine conference one time. But she did, and I have it cited in my book. But she used the expression too. She has a whole chapter on baseball Annies, and I have a quote in my book. That expression, baseball Annie, refers to all the baseball groupies. Some of them were just, they wanted to have a sexual relationship with the baseball players, but other of them just kind of had a fascination with baseball players in general. And like Violet, though, Violet really, all she wanted to do was to meet a nice young man and settle down with 2 kids and a white picket fence. And in fact, the Cubs historian and I were talking about that. Yeah, it didn't really. Yeah.
Didn't matter that it was Billy Jersey.
Yes.
Jordan.
Well, she kind of fell for him but as the Cubs historian, Ed Hardig and I were talking about, and Ed knows a lot about the Cubs and about the history. And he said he feels sure that if it wasn't for Billy, and this is almost a direct quote, it would have been some other baseball player, some other Cubs
Okay.
player. You know, she just really wanted to get married to a baseball player in general.
Okay.
But if it wasn't for
Thank you.
Billy, Karen would be somebody else. But she kind
Okay,
of set her
thank
sights on Billy early on.
Evidently.
Yeah.
Okay,
In fact, I
thank
think
you.
the woman who wrote that one book, I can't remember her name, but she said some women collected collected players like baseball cards in terms of a sexual nature. That is, yeah. But
Okay, thank you.
yeah, hi, thanks, Karen, very much. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jack. Thanks so much for the presentation. I enjoyed it. So was this an isolated incident for her, or were there any other, incidents where she, expressed her anger or whatever in a violent way, or it's kind of curious to me that that this is I mean, obviously she came from an abusive background and didn't learn how to cope with situations appropriately. But did you come across any other
Well,
incidents?
as a matter of fact, she originally, I didn't go into this, but I do go into in my book. She originally had gone out with Kai Kyler too for a while later but then she found out he was married at the time. So she said that she dropped him because he was married, but she and a quote, a mysterious girlfriend who was probably her stepsister. They went out target shooting in an alley the night before the shooting. And Billy said in an interview like 50 years later that she went to Kai Collar's room and she accused him of breaking up their relationship with Billy by telling Billy that she was going out with other guys. And she wrote in this one letter that gossips began to cast aspersions on my character. And she blamed Kai Kyler most of all. And so she went to his hotel room and wrote on a mirror, supposedly, "I'm going to kill you." And Billy said this years later in an interview, but I could find absolutely no contemporary documents to ever bear this up. And I think Billy might have been misremembering, but I did get the impression in a lot of the contemporary stories at that time that she had even told people in the motel room. This was corroborated in a couple of newspaper articles that she says, if I'm going to get Billy, and if he denies that, she was told that he was going out with other girls, and she said something like, I'm going to ask him this, and if he doesn't deny it, I'm going to give him the works, meaning she was going to threaten him. So several people at the Hotel Carlos said that they heard her make violent comments about Billy to them. But later on in life, there was nothing. But right before all this happened, yeah, there were a few things, but basically directed at Billy and supposedly to Kai Kyler, but I couldn't find any proof of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. In fact, in this interview, it was reprinted in a book called Baseball Chicago Style by Jerome Holtzman. And it was a 1988, I think it was, something like that. And but I saw some other errors that he in this interview, so that he might have just been embellishing this, or his memory might not have been correct. I mean, this happened in 32 and this was 88 when he gave, or maybe no, he died in 88, maybe it was 82 or 83. It was in the 80s sometime when he gave this interview, and he just might have been disremembering. Yeah, Jim.
This is Jim. Yeah. This brought up for me opportunity some years ago, several times to talk with Woody English.
Oh yeah.
About his career and his background. And one of the things that he brought up as a former manager for the League of Their Own, All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, is how when he was asked to do that, he brought to that a real commitment to have that whole endeavor above reproach. And he said part of it was his own personal Christian commitment, very strong person of faith.
Really?
Yeah, but also his background experiences. And he didn't go into this particular one, but he said earlier experiences just told him, above all, you've got to just keep it clean, keep it above board. And I admired that. I counted a privilege to have spoken with him.
Oh yeah, I would
Great
love to have
guy.
done that too.
But
Yeah.
this brought that back to me, his own
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
That's neat. Yeah. I looked at my watch, you guys. I'm sorry for going on a little bit too long here. I ad-libbed a little bit because I kept on getting carried away with stories, so I apologize for that.
Jack, I was going to ask you how his teammates reacted to all this. They were actually, they played together for a long time.
They
in the
did play
Cubs team.
together, and thanks for asking that question because they did meet up with Violet later on. They all supported Billy, all of them, by the way. They all supported him. I wouldn't say against her, but when all this was going on, they visited him in the hospital and everything. And Violet wanted to see Billy and kind of apologize, and they'd have none of it. Just stay away from him. And a footnote in a book on Rogers Hornsby, Guy Bush is being quoted as saying that, maybe Jim, it might have been Woody English, they're saying they were bowling in a bowling alley in Chicago, and one of them looked up and saw Violet in a couple lanes over, and the exact quote was like, "We ran out of there like a bullet," unquote. They didn't want to be anywhere near Violet. So there's a couple of baseball players and I think a football player was with them too, for the Chicago Bears, but yeah, they all supported Billy. And by the way, I asked Billy's daughter, whether, and I hated to ask this, but I had to know. I said, well, did you know that your dad was shot? And she says, quote, we all knew about it, but it was never spoken about in our home. Not when I was growing up, never. And she emphasized the word never. But Billy's grandson knew about it, and he was just, he was great to talk about it. When my book came out, he just loved the book, and I sent him a copy, and I talk about your dad here and being shot, and I hope he liked it, but he said he loved it, and he thought he thought I treated Billy really well in it.
Any other questions before we close for Jack?
Good. We're shutting down on time too, which is good. I like that.
Yeah.
Don't
I
want to
didn't
keep
know what
people
would
too
happen at
long.
11 o'clock because I said SABR, we did it through SABR headquarters, and they gave us 10 to 11, but obviously they don't shut us down right at 11.
Well, good, because I did go on a little bit too long here.
It was great, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. It was great. I love talking about this, and thanks so much for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for being with us.
You all made my day.
It's been a pleasure, and we'll keep you posted as to upcoming things going on in the chapter. Thank you again, Jack.
Good. I hope to join you as a listener sometime too.
Yeah,
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
I appreciate
Bye-bye,
it very
everyone.
much. Goodbye.